Welcome to News Now. When City of Detroit residents have serious problems, they call on the city ombudsman to investigate. Here to tell us where the city is succeeding and failing its residents is Ombudsman Bruce Simpson. Bruce, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. How are you doing?
It's nice to meet you. It's nice to see you. You are in year 4, going on 5 of a 10-year term.
That is correct.
And you are independent. You are not political.
Independent oversight agency, meaning that we are not a part of the executive or legislative branch. So we have some latitude to do our job objectively, not politically.
That means you're not told how the investigations are supposed to come out at the end.
Not at all.
We follow the facts and go where they lead us.
Yes, wherever they take us.
Okay. So when I think of Ombudsman's office, I think of calling in and complaining about things from, I don't know, my neighbor's leaves are on my grass, or,
Right.
or the bus is late, or I don't know. What you tell me, what is your office about, and what kind of things are people calling you about complaints and to investigate?
So we still handle what you think of as the traditional complaint. Every city department, every service, every authority, so that includes the Land Bank and the DBA, Detroit Building Authority, we handle all of those complaints. So we're not limited in terms of the type of complaints that we handle. Some are basic, relatively easy to resolve. Others require extensive investigation and take some time. So a typical complaint we can resolve very quickly with a phone call or email, but sometimes you have to do a little digging and research, and we don't mind it.
Let's talk about the easy ones first, okay?
Okay.
So somebody picks up the phone and calls your office. What might they say, and what might you do? How many calls do you get?
Oh,
Thousands, right?
yeah, thousands of calls. Typically, we provide, just for our viewers' consumption, on our website, on the city's website, you can see all of our annual reports. You can see exactly what we've reported on, the resolutions, so on and so forth. But typically, we take in about 5,000 real complaints that we've had to resolve. But a typical call it could be a business owner, right? Most people think it's just a resident calling about that garbage can that was left out. No, a business owner who was denied their income tax clearance and can't seem to navigate the bureaucracy may need our assistance. In that instance, one of my staff, I have a staff of 7, one of them would physically, or if need be, communicate with the income tax division, see what the issue is, and walk them through the resolution. We want that business owner, of course, to do business and ultimately pay taxes.
Is it kind of like that feeling you can't fight City Hall, you get on the phone and you can't get it resolved yourself, and maybe you don't know who to talk to or how to get through to the person on the other end, but you guys can help navigate that?
Absolutely. So city government can be intimidating for a lot of people. They don't know where to start, how to navigate it. Oftentimes we'll find someone who is engaged in the process of navigating City Hall or city government, and they're frustrated, and that's where we step into a system. We don't necessarily ask to be the first call. Give that respective department an opportunity to resolve the issue. But if we're negligent as a city or irresponsible or don't do our job in any way, shape, or form, that is when your ombudsman intervenes.
When I talk to the FBI, they'll say there's no call that is too small because we don't know if the smallest call might lead to, a big investigation. Is that true in your case? Does it sometimes work that way?
It's very true, not just from an investigative standpoint, but also a policy standpoint. So one single complaint can lead you to a policy that is very flawed, that we have to make a recommendation on and say to City Council as well as the administration, hey, we need to change this. Let me give you an example of that. Over the summer, it became clear that we had a serial killer on the loose, right? We said back in March of 2019 that there need to be cadaver dogs searching these dangerous buildings. Now, when I said it, some people looked at me kind of crazy, but the reality of the matter was, less than 90 days later, we saw the need for something like that. Now that policy has morphed in the DPD, neighborhood police officers going in and out of homes to make sure that there are no, unfortunately dead bodies there, but that's a policy that originated in the ombudsman's office.
And that, that's a real thing, because I remember when that kind of came out, it was like, is there a serial killer? Is there not a serial killer? Do we need to keep everybody inside, or are we are we going crazy with this thing, right?
Yeah.
But through the process of real life experience, you learned that the policy in place was not significant enough.
Oh, absolutely. And so not just, we suggested cadaver dogs, right? And the only reason we didn't use cadaver dogs because the state didn't have enough and the resources weren't there. So we used physical bodies, police officers to go in. But if you talk to persons performing demolition work, they'll tell you when they show up on a demolition site, they have to take an immediate break after they announce their presence, because if you spend time in the community, you'll know some of the drug dealers stash guns, drugs, money even sometimes in these abandoned structures. So in knowing and understanding all of that, we knew that, ultimately sometimes a body could even be dumped. And that's how we got to that space.
Yeah, so if you're, if you're just looking at something on paper and you're talking about knocking down an abandoned house, you're like, great. But if you live in the neighborhood, you realize that those are more than just empty, abandoned homes. Those are hangouts or clubs for young kids, often a place where they're hiding drugs or guns. And in worst case scenarios, they may drop a body there, and they may set the house on fire. All of these things do happen.
Prime for arson. You see dog fighting in these locations, prostitution, drug dealing, all the like. So, just having a feel of what's needed in the community is something we pride ourselves in. When I made that statement, like I said, it was like, hey, what are you talking about, dogs? And we don't worry about necessarily public perception. In many ways, we're ahead of the curve. Another example of that would be at a time when it wasn't popular and we were receiving millions and millions of dollars to perform this work from the federal government, we said that the Detroit Building Authority, their agreement with the city of Detroit to manage demolition should be terminated. Now, you got over $250 million that have come from Treasury for us to perform this work. That was not taken lightly, but guess what? Fast forward a few months as we start talking about trying to secure a bond to perform this type of work. What did they say? They being the city. They themselves acknowledged and confirmed that we were right and made a move to bring demolition in-house and to have that additional oversight, which is also ombudsman recommendation. So we don't worry about the politics of it. We're not trying to win a popularity contest, but we are trying to make sure that the citizens get the best service they can have.
Okay, we're going to dig into that, and when we come back, we're gonna see how it goes from maybe a simple complaint to an investigation to the recommendations, and then what's done with those recommendations or what isn't done with those recommendations.
Okay.
All right, we'll be right back with more with Bruce Simpson after this. Stay with us. Welcome back. We continue our conversation now with City of Detroit Ombudsman Bruce Simpson. Bruce, so this is really interesting. The demolition program, to almost anybody out there watching, they know that this is a big issue, a big deal. A lot of homes get torn down every year. It's one of the first things Mayor Mike Duggan said he was going to do, and they came in and they started doing it. And there was a lot of controversy over it in the news. People were talking about the prices went up and who were the contractors and what was going to happen. And there's talk of federal investigations and all kinds of things. And suddenly your office, the Ombudsman's office, gets involved. How does that happen?
Kevin, demolition is this administration's signature issue, right? So with so much focus on demolition, it's only natural that a lot of the traffic we get revolves around demolition. We've spent a lot of money, according to our Auditor General, over $500 million up to this point as it relates to demo altogether. That's, of course, federal funding along with general fund funding. For me, demolition is important for a number of reasons, not just because of the cost, once again, that you mentioned, where we saw the cost of demo spike to outrageous numbers, over in excess of $20,000 for a relatively small home, right? That's a problem in itself because those are taxpayer dollars. But the thing about demolition, a lot of people don't necessarily understand or don't take home with them that we consider when we take those complaints. How a demolition is performed in a particular community has a lasting effect on that community. So if you have a particular contractor that has not removed hazardous materials, has chosen to bury them, does not perform the job appropriately because they say, hey, it's just Detroit, all those things, and they feel they can get away with it, right? All those things concern us, and that, kind of made me look at the managing entity, which in this case was the DBA.
And so, does it start with a phone call? Does someone call in and say, hey, I bid on this and I didn't get it, I think something's fishy? Or does someone call in and say, hey, I'm watching them knock down this house next door and they didn't hose it down like they're supposed to keep the asbestos down? Or hey, I think they're supposed to be taking this stuff away in trucks and they're burying it,
right,
where they just knocked the property down, which is not proper. How does that come to you? Or do you read the paper and say, hey, everybody's talking about this, we should dig into this?
So it's the description of, we get a call. We do physical intake too, so people have the ability to come to City Hall and walk in and speak to either myself or any assistant ombudsman. But typically we will get a call and they would describe the complaint to us. Sometimes they want to remain anonymous. Sometimes they have no problem letting you know who they are and what they want done about the issue, whatever it may be. So it typically starts there.
Is it anonymous if they want to be anonymous?
Yes, absolutely. People are fearful, and rightfully so, sometimes, of retribution. It's a real thing, and so we try to protect anyone that indicates to us that they want to remain anonymous. But it typically starts there with that type of contact, even an email sometimes, right? But once we receive the information, we investigate said information. Everything, all the communication we receive is not a complaint. Everything's not a complaint. People hear stuff, it's secondhand information,
Right.
It's not firsthand. I'm sure in your business people tell you things all the time, and then it's like, hey, yeah, that wasn't true. So we investigate. We perform site visits, right? So if I hear about a location, I'll physically go out or have my staff go out to investigate physically and lay eyes on the issue if it's that type of complaint. So it starts there, and then if we see a pattern developing through the data that we're receiving, then that's certainly an indication that we need to pay greater attention to this. Does it always have to be something that we see in the data? No. I believe that since formally joining the city of Detroit in 2007, we have a very good eye for what's missing, what's needed, and we interject and say, hey, maybe we should do X instead of Y.
So there have been so many developments in this demolition investigation.
Mm-hmm.
How did you go about, you have a staff of 7, how did you go about going and investigating all these different things? Like, were the bids fair? Did one contractor get a hand up? Was it a real open bid? Is somebody, we had cases where people were burying bad dirt, and then we had dirt that was being brought in that where it wasn't supposed to be coming from, or all these things. How do you investigate that with a
Such a
fairly small office?
Yeah, more resources would be nice. But you deal with what's brought to you at the time. So someone might say, Bruce is just against demolition. That's the furthest thing from the truth. Blight is one of the largest complaints that we receive, and houses that need to be demolished are part of blight. We just want it done the proper way. So to give you an example of us being on objective as can be, when contractors came to us and said, hey, we're not being paid in a timely fashion, that's something that we went to the city council table with and had that discussion and made it noted, hey, we have these contractors that are not being paid. That's truly problematic for the small business demolition company that's out there that doesn't have the resources to go months on end without being paid.
Yeah, because suddenly now you're changing the playing field just by not paying on time. This company needs that check for their current payroll, where a big company can get by for a month or 6 months or a year. So it becomes an uneven playing field, right?
Right, and so that's us intervening, right, on behalf of all the contractors that were not getting paid at the time. So it's not a, you don't pick and choose. If it's brought to you and there's legitimacy to it, you try to see that through and take it from there. There are so many things that you could look at, but we deal with them as they come.
And after your investigation, you came up with some pretty interesting recommendations, and I'm not sure how well they were received or how unwelcome they were, but we're going to get into that as soon as we come back. We'll be right back with more news now. And welcome back. We continue our conversation with Bruce Simpson, the Detroit Ombudsman.
Yes, sir.
So we've gotten into this quite a bit. Now I want to hear what happens. How did you come up with recommendations to sort of fix these massive problems in the demolition program, and how were they received?
It is part of the ombudsman's job to provide these recommendations. You know, it'd be one thing if I'm just taking complaint after complaint. Those complaints are there to help guide me in terms of what is problematic in the city, right, and what isn't. It doesn't always have to have data behind it, but we prefer it that way. That way we can say, look, here's why we went this way. Sometimes it is the eyeball test, you know, just knowing that
something's not right.
Yeah, that's not right. And so that's how we pretty much come to the conclusion that we need to make a recommendation about something.
Yeah, so this is a $500 million program, and you're coming in with recommendations and some pretty major ones. What were your recommendations?
Well, we said we wanted the managing entity, the Detroit Building Authority, to not perform that function anymore. Now, why did we say it? It wasn't an attack or anything like that. Traditionally, up until this administration, they had not performed that type of service. So demolition was never managed by the Detroit Building Authority up until this administration. Putting such resources behind authorities can be problematic, whether you're talking about the Land Bank Authority or the Detroit Building Authority. It puts distance between the municipal government and an authority that ultimately reports to a board. These authorities have boards.
But you're going to major power brokers in the city and you're saying, look, changes have to be made. Are they like, oh man, what are you doing here again? Or are they like, oh, thank gosh, you're here to help us. Welcome.
we would respectfully request that everyone keep an open mind, understand that we're not attacking anyone, understanding that the recommendation is something that we saw as needed, otherwise we would not have made it. With that being said, we don't ask for permission either. I don't check in per se and say, hey, here's what I'm doing. I will talk to department heads and, you know, pick their brain a little bit, but ultimately the decision is mine. And you can see that because sometimes what we choose to go with as a recommendation is not popular. So to the question of how is it received, we made a joke off camera, and it's true. I don't receive those Christmas cards during the holiday season, but I'm okay with that as long as the job that we're doing is one that is for the people.
Ultimately, you don't have the power to make the change, though, right? You make the recommendation to City Council,
right,
and they have the power to make change, or the mayor's office has the power to make change, or a individual department.
Exactly. So we speak to both branches of government. Council, who has the ability to make change, obviously through legislation. The mayor's office or the mayor and the executive branch through policy. So. We can't implement it. We tell you where the problem is, and it's up to our elected officials to drive that point home or say, well, we're not sure, or whatever they decide.
All right, with the time we have left, let's talk about something a little lighter. Everybody knows like the slow roll in Detroit. You see all these bicycles and everybody's going crazy, and I'm sure that created some problems too or whatever. But what is going on with bike lanes in Detroit? Is this the new place for everybody to come and bike, or can you bike the whole city? What are you finding in your...
So we made a recommendation about bike lanes, and the implementation of said bike lanes. One thing that we saw as problematic, the city has a bad habit of doing what I refer to as implementation without consultation. So we do it.
Let's just do it first and ask questions later.
Yeah, that's not always appropriate because, people may or may not want it. I'm not against bike lanes, but what I am against is anything that looks like or appears to be not appropriately prioritizing the needs and our resources as it pertains to the needs of the citizens. When we have affordable housing issues, water issues, access to affordable and clean water, crime, blight, the list goes on, some of the more serious things we've already discussed. And then we turn the page and we see
Bike lanes.
Bike lanes. Yeah, and it makes sense in certain places. Hey, if it's going to take you to the river, or if it's going to do that it's going to take you to a job. But when I'm in the neighborhood and I see a block that has 3 homes on it, and one of the 3 is dilapidated.
They need buses to get to work. They don't need a bike lane.
And then I see a bike lane abutting that street or on that street. It does something to me.
Detroit's massive. It was 100 square miles or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just
139.
139. It's huge.
Yep.
It's. I mean, you could fit 2-3 major cities inside the footprint
Yes.
of Detroit. So all of Detroit doesn't need a bike lane,
No.
right?
No.
And there are huge challenges with even doing that, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure a lot of the funding is federal, and we have to spend it somehow, but I'm sure there are also ways to get creative. When we decided we wanted to do demo, we went and had that money reprogrammed. That was federal funding.
These things, they hit my investigative brain, and I'm like, I want to know who has the contracts for bike lanes, because if they're doing bike lanes on streets where there's only 3 houses, I want to know who has the contract for the bike lanes. But so what kind of recommendations then do you come back with?
So for that one, we said, hey, planning and development as well as the Department of Public Works needs to engage our citizenry and let them have a say in where they think it's viable and where it's not, because in some instances you have major thoroughfares that will have a bike lane added, and then we have parking on top of that added. So you could look at Livermore, you could look at Jefferson, a bike lane, parking, and then the actual thoroughfare itself is smaller. There's an educational component that has to be rolled out. This has to be something that is very robust. You can't do it on a whim, and you need feedback from the people. So we said, engage the people. And if you say that you have, we'll do even more, because you got a lot of bike lanes and not enough engagement.
All right, and we are going to put right here below us the number and the website to get to the Ombudsman, because these are reports that are worth reading. If you want to know what they're looking at and what their recommendations are, that's the place to go. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.